interested parties, if you know what I mean. Welcome. I'm glad you've been able to join me today. I hope that other people join. I've invited several other people to this very interesting topic because I do think there's something to discuss here, something very important. I've opened up the chat on the sidebar. I think everybody can go into the chat. I wouldn't entirely mind it if you wanted to join me in this hangout. If you have some passion about the issue and you want to be on it, I wish I knew for sure how to get you in, because I'm going to be doing this task. Maybe you could email us, or actually, here's what I'm going to do. Let me post. I can't really do that. I only see the YouTube page and the event page and the video embed. So if you come, that's maybe you can just email Briggs at Liberty.me, and then you can be added to the task, to the phone call. In any case, and I can add other people as you request it. So what we're talking about here is Bitcoin and its relationship to the regression theorem. And this is a piece that I had yesterday on fee.org. And it was a piece I wrote with great reluctance because in the end, I'm not sure it really matters. I mean, Bitcoin's going to take its own course, whether it fits with the regression theorem or not. It's either going to be our money or not. Nothing we say about it's going to make any difference in that regard. So it's tempting just to say whatever Mises said 102 years ago, and the theory of money and credit has no relevance. Maybe he lived in a pre-digital age. Maybe he didn't understand what's what. Maybe we don't understand the regression theorem. In any case, the Bitcoin is a reality. It's like, do you want to believe your theory, or you want to believe the reality? Eventually, for me, in 2013. Early in 2013, spring of 2013, I gradually came to the view that Bitcoin was a real money in many ways. It was functioning as money, and it made no sense to just sit around puzzling forever to decide if this is true based on this very old theory. So I kind of suspended my interest in this theoretical problem to just draw attention to the reality that was all around us, which is very exciting. I mean, after all, money has been nationalized for 100 years, and then out of nowhere, and seemingly out of nowhere, in early 2009, we saw the emergence of a new currency that was a bottom-up currency, not a top-down monetary reform, but a kind of revolutionary tactic from below to give us a better money. We did get a better money, and it's kind of amazing, and it's significant from a historical point of view, because this is a technology that's not going anywhere. It's just going to continue to be played with and improved upon, and it's something that all economic actors everywhere in the world have to deal with. So there's no sense in being in denial about this just because of a theoretical problem. Now, so what is a theoretical problem? I think there's two ways to express this. One is in a very formal way, according to the dictates of the so-called regression theorem. A phrase, by the way, that did not emerge in Mises' 1912 book, but came about later and found itself in a very high position in the theories of money's origins in 1949. With human action. I'm not sure about the 1940 edition. It probably included the same phrase, but it's in German, and I hadn't really looked it up. So there's that, and then there's the more intuitive version of the same thing, which is that, look, Bitcoin can't be a money. It's made up out of computer code. You can't have just some genius programmer suddenly invent a new money for the whole world out of a protocol. It's not based on anything real. It's not rooted in genuine human experience. So surely there's something gone wrong. This is not how we expected money to be reformed. For many generations, advocates of monetary reform, particularly of the gold standard and otherwise, have had a particular scenario in mind for how we would get a new money. That there would be an agreement, maybe the Senate would do it, the U.S. would get a good president who would order the Treasury to give us a gold standard, maybe there'd be an international conference, whatever. That's how we imagined money would be. There would be the mechanism of reform. It would be top down. Let's persuade the elites, and then the elites would reform money through our relentless agitation, protests outside the Fed, whatever it's going to be. So, but after half a century of this kind of activity, I think it's pretty obvious this isn't not going to happen. Fiat money, centralized banking, a very close tie between money, banking, and the state is very much in the interests of the elites. It's not in the interests of the public, but it's in the interests of the elites. They all benefit from the present system. Why would they want to get rid of it? So there's always been something wrong with the mechanism of change in the world of hard money. We're basically asking the elites to, out of sheer public service mindedness, reform money because it's the right thing to do. Unfortunately, the state rarely, if ever, does the right thing. So suddenly we have this new money emerging on the internet in 2009, growing out of a white paper that came to be released in October the 31st in 2008. And gradually over the next 5 years, we saw something remarkable happen. This money is really taking hold, and Bitcoin is taking hold. You can go to bitcoin.info and watch transactions taking place in real time. They happen every a few transactions every second at this point. The volume is on the increase. The price is obviously very high, and it's being used all over the world, and payment systems being accepted by merchants all over the world, and holds out a very high promise in the developing world and in the developed world as being an alternative money and payment system. So we've got a problem. How do we make sense of this from a theoretical point of view? That's what the article addresses. So let's return to 1912 in Mises's book, Theory of Money and Credit. You have to, in order to find the section on the regression theorem, to find out what he actually said, you have to go very deeply into the book. It's not in the early sections of the book on money's origins. You have to move all the way to chapter 8, in the section in which he's addressing quantity theorists, and he gives an additional detail that's, Murray Rothbard says is a contribution beyond what his teacher Carl Menger gave us. Menger described money's origins as basically evolving out of market exchange. First, you have a commodity that's a part of a barter society, highly valued, suddenly becomes acquired not for consumption, but rather acquired in anticipation that it would be used later to trade for something else. And that's the mechanism by which we go from direct to indirect exchange, and money is invented. In Menger's scenario, this happens gradually over a long period of time. Something can become money for a few people in a particular area for a little while, maybe be outcompeted by something else. The whole process is fueled by entrepreneurship, which is to say that some far-seeing individuals, start eyeballing some particular commodity and go, well, this commodity is pretty valuable to a lot of people besides me for consumption. Maybe I'll acquire it not to use it directly as a final consumer good, but rather acquire it in anticipation that other people will accept it in the future. So suddenly you get a barter demand evolving into a monetary demand, and it takes on a different kind of qualities. And eventually, as this process unrolls itself into the future, you have the emergence of a dominant money, which becomes, over time, the most marketable commodity in society, the most liquid, the most marketable, and that's the money. So Mises added to this a very interesting point. And he's dealing with the problem of why it is that money has the price it has in terms of goods and services. Where does money acquire, or why does money have a particular prices versus not that particular price? Where does the value initially come from? And what Mises says is that the exchange ratios that are associated with that the commodity that comes with money can be traced back or regressed back in time when it was originally a barter commodity. So that if you had, for example, salt that was traded at some established exchange ratio for chickens, then that's the pricing system associated with that salt would be absorbed into the monetary uses of salt, and that's where the price of money comes from. That's where the relationship between money and goods and services comes from. So, and Mises specifically says in 1912, this is all due to use value. That's his phrase. It's direct use and the utility to the consumer. That insofar as something is valuable to the consumer, then that value comes to be the monetary, the basis of the monetary value once the transition from barter to indirect exchange takes place. And he says this follows from logic, because the money just can't emerge out of nowhere. It can't be you can't just tag some commodity or some paper ticket or something else to be money because of social consensus or because the state accepts it for payment of taxes or anything else. The value really has to grow out of market exchange and direct utility, meaning that the commodity itself has to have some pre-existing value on the market as a non-monetary good before it can become a monetary good. That's Mises's regression theorem. And so you look at Bitcoin and you think, how does this work? I mean, because there was obviously no Bitcoin. You know, there was salt that flavored food. There was beaver pelts that you could wear. There were shells that you could use maybe for decoration or some other purpose. There's gold that's beautiful for jewelry, and maybe it has some industrial uses. All the existing monies in history have had some obvious consumer-oriented value before it became money. That is not true with Bitcoin. So how do we resolve this? So in my article, and this is puzzle again. It's not as if I've always known the answer to this. So other people who understood the solution, Conrad Graf, Daniel Krawitz, Michael Goldstein, Peter Serta. There's all these people who've been thinking about Bitcoin much longer than I have, who figured this out much before I did. But basically the solution is this. The thing that really confuses people about Bitcoin is to look at Bitcoin only as a commodity, as a commodity independent of anything else, as if it were a traditional money. That is not true. This is the most salient fact about Bitcoin, is that it's not just a money, it's a payment system. This is unusual because we're used to thinking of money and payment systems as separate. So we have dollars and we have Visa. We have euros and we have PayPal. We have yens and we have wire transfers. The money is an independent unit, but the payment system associated with that money is provided by a third party based on a trust relationship. So Visa's only going to deal with us if they think we're going to pay our bills. PayPal is only going to deal with us if they know who we are. And wire transfers are only going to take place if we cough up the whole of our identities and the third-party institution expresses some confidence in our willingness and ability to be collected from. That's the way payment systems in the modern age work. Bitcoin's completely different. It started off as a payment system living on a blockchain. And if you read the white paper from October 31st by Satoshi, what's very interesting about it is that there's very little discussion of currency or money at all. Mostly the focus is on the network, the blockchain, a trustless system of time-stamped and verifiable verifiably true exchanges of units of information, and those units of information themselves have associated with them a certain property title. This was and is an unbelievable innovation in the history of the world. It's never been possible before the blockchain to accomplish this particular task of trading units of information that have assigned property titles with verifiable truth that ward against malicious actors connected to particular actions of individuals peer-to-peer without going through a third party. It's an amazing thing to have happened, and it never happened before. It solved the so-called Byzantine generals problem. If you want to look that up on Wikipedia, it's a long-running problem in math that extends from a sort of a military metaphor having to do with the inability of generals over a large geographic space to be able to coordinate attack in absence of the ability to verify their plans and to know that there aren't malicious actors that are interrupting the transmission flows of information. The blockchain solves this problem, and this was Satoshi's key innovation. The first Genesis block of Bitcoin came out on January 9th of 2009. As I pointed out in my piece, the value of Bitcoin in the early days was exactly zero. It wasn't just low, it was exactly zero. There was no posted price of Bitcoin, and yet people used it. You can look back at the history and look at the timelines and see exactly what's going on here. And after all, the regression theorem is a story about history, so there's no point in talking about the regression theorem as it applies to Bitcoin without looking at Bitcoin history. So here's the way the history unfolds. There's one transaction, and it's the release of the Genesis block, and then the people in Satoshi's world at the time began to kind of play around with this new tool called the blockchain. Very quickly it was ramped up. Transactions ranged between 30 one day, 150 the next, 200 one day, and 20 the next, and so on. I just eyeballed the transactions in the first 6 or 8 months of the existence of the blockchain and saw that I would say on average there are about 100 transactions a day. But what was taking place with these transactions? People were testing out the system to see if it really worked. If you could get these verifiable units of information sent peer-to-peer around the world in a costless way that prevented the double spending of any of the accounting units attached to the blockchain. Those accounting units are called bitcoins. Will the blockchain stand up to this kind of use? And this was what happened over the next 8 and 10 months. A lot of use, a lot of trial, and a lot of error. This is, I would say, analogous to, as far as the regression theorem, trying to discover the use value of the pre-monetary commodity. In this case, the commodity is the blockchain. The use value is being tested. Now, after my article appeared, several people said to me, well, this doesn't work because the regression theorem requires that there be an exchange ratio associated with the pre-monetary commodity that eventually becomes money. There is no exchange ratio revealing itself anywhere on the blockchain during these first 10 months of its existence. These are free exchanges back and forth. There's no exchange ratio. That's true enough, but the reason for that is that the blockchain is an open source technology that lives on a distributed network. In other words, you don't have to pay to access it. Anyone could have used it for free. Anyone in the world. There weren't that many people who did it because nobody really cared except hyper code geeks and the like. But nonetheless, they did use it to test it out, to test its value. And the use value is demonstrated in the fact of its use during these first 10 months. Maybe a plaything, maybe an experiment. It's also called entrepreneurship. It's just really, really interesting to see this amazing technology happen. There couldn't have been any exchange ratios. In other words, I couldn't have given up, a shoe for access to the blockchain or a hat for a test of transmitting Bitcoin, because it is an open source, distributed, decentralized network that by its very nature does not call forth a price. So let's just fast forward in time now to October 5th, 2009. We had the first Bitcoin exchange post a price of Bitcoin. It was the first date at which there was any publicly posted price of the accounting unit attached to this distributed network called the blockchain. And that price was about 1/10 of a penny, which many Bitcoiners at the time found to be outrageously expensive and exaggerated. There's no way to know for sure. All prices, and to some extent, are speculative. Nobody knows for sure what the price of anything is. The only thing we know for sure is what things trade for in real life, and then any trades in any particular price are always past prices. They don't tell you anything about the future. Nonetheless, that's the data point we have. For the first time in the history of the world, Bitcoin suddenly had a value. And it became, I would say, on that day, a kind of limited money in the Mengerian, Misesian sense. We're not waiting for Bitcoin to become money. It already is money. Something acquired not for its consumptive value, but to trade at a later date, because you anticipate people are going to value this unit, not to consume it, but to trade for other goods and services. That's what a money is. So on that date, I would say that according to that definition, Bitcoin began its emergence as a money in whatever limited form. So you see the fulfillment of the conditions of the regression theorem. You have use value leading to monetary value. The use value of the blockchain leading to the monetary value of the Bitcoin over the course of 10 months. That understanding, that historical sort of story, fits exactly with both Menger and Mises's theory, with the one difference being that the initial price of Bitcoin did not reflect an exchange ratio having been previously established on the market, but that's because the use of the blockchain itself was unpriced. It lives on an open source network, available free to everybody, falling somewhere in this mysterious realm between public and private property. If it had been a commodity like shells or salt or gold, yeah, there would have been a barter price to it. But it is not commodified in that sense. A distributed network is a very special thing. Nonetheless, the use value became very obvious to all the users of the network, and that use value got ported over into the accounting unit called Bitcoin. Now, that's a very involved and detailed scenario, all designed to kind of illustrate the application of the regression theorem in the 21st century digital technology. I'm not arguing that Mises would have, if he had been around, or Murray Rothbard, for that example, for that matter, if they had been around in October or November, would have immediately said, "Oh, sure, this is the new money for the new age." I don't know what they would have said about this. So there's no way to know. I mean, one problem here is it's very difficult to explain technologically. Bitcoin, again, is both an accounting unit and a payment system. They're woven together in the protocol. They're inseparable. This one clump, it's a service plus an accounting unit, all rolled together. If we could conceptually separate them, the value of Bitcoin would fall to zero, but in the end, Bitcoin cannot be separated from the blockchain. Those are all bound together, and that's the very source of the value of each. This is just a different it's a different technology than any money that's ever existed, because it unites these two disparate functions, one, commodified money, and two, a third-party trust-based payment network. It combines both those things and converts the trust-based payment network into a trustless system of open-source distributed network verification, together with and bound up with the currency unit itself. And I think if you understand that, then you understand how Mises's regression theorem actually applies. And I think that that is the solution, and that was the argument I made on my article. Now again, I was reluctant to write this article because it seems like a weird, arcane issue. It's like, why is everybody obsessing about this old-timey theory? This is the new age. Nonetheless, given my own heritage and devotion to Misesian monetary outlooks, I was curious about how the solution would work itself out in practice, and it took me fully 12 months to fully realize it. During the course of which I had become a champion of Bitcoin. I had to kind of like leave the theory on the shelf to observe the reality outside the window. I didn't want to do that. It's either that or just deny the reality, essentially. So it took me fully 12 months to finally come to this realization, which I did with the help of, as I say, people like Daniel Krawitz, Conrad Graf, and Peter Serta, who had figured all this stuff out long before I did. There's a slightly funny story about this. When I was in Australia, in Brisbane, I think must have been the summer of 2013, so more than a year ago now. I was giving a series of lectures there on Austrian economics or whatever, and I talked about Bitcoin a lot. And Conrad Graf stood up to defend the unity of the regression theorem and Bitcoin. And I remember dismissing his explanation, just kind of like, look, Conrad, you can go through all these intellectual leaps, that's fine, but it doesn't really matter either way. Whether the Austrians are right or wrong on this point, Bitcoin is a reality, let's just deal with it. And it struck me at the time that he was expending a tremendous amount of intellectual labor to bolster this ancient theory, and like, what do we get out of that? And I didn't get it. Over the coming 6 months or a year, I finally gradually realized that Conrad had actually an important point, that there is no wedge between these two things. But it took me a long time to figure it out. So my article appeared yesterday. It already ignited massive amounts of controversy. I'm a little bit embarrassed that several people tweeted that this is, some sort of brilliant and epic contribution to history of ideas, especially because I was hardly the first one that came up with the idea. There were many others in this space. It's just that I happened to have access to this public forum and wrote a popular article about it rather than a code-ridden treatise on the subject. So that's a little bit embarrassing to me. But I feel like in my own thinking about the subject, I have to say I'm a little bit more at peace now with the authenticity, legitimacy of Bitcoin and its prospects for becoming a global monetary unit. Not just used by one nation, but used by all nations for all trades on a peer-to-peer basis. Again, there's the critical things you need to understand about Bitcoin. It's not a company, it's an open source network. That open source network is all about the blockchain. Bitcoin is in a way incidental to the blockchain. It's just the expression of it's just the titled units of information that are being transmitted. Those are the things that are being valued overtly, but you have to look beneath the surface and see that the real value comes from the payment network that it's attached to. Could Mises have anticipated something like this? Could Rothbard have anticipated? No, I don't think so. I don't think anybody understood anything about distributed networks or how they could possibly work until, when did Napster come about? That was 1999. So at best, it would have been 15 years ago when people first began to understand the power of the distributed network. And only within the last 5 years did we even imagine this distributed network could have been used for money. Now, to be sure, dating back 20 years, there's all kind of writings in the cyberpunk space. Michael Goldstein is an expert about this. speculated about this eventuality. I mean, for that matter, Milton Friedman, I think in the 1970s, said we're going to need a new electronic currency in the future that he thought could be invented through pure technological information and entrepreneurship. So there are people who saw the possibilities, but the particulars, that had to be left to Satoshi Nakamoto, one of the great geniuses of our time, if not the great genius so far of the 21st century. So that's my whole article. There's more to say about the subject, more puzzles. I would like to note that there's a number of people out there, you know, internet Austro-libertarians, I guess you could call them, who are rejecting the reality of Bitcoin on grounds of the regression theorem. They're just saying, look, this can't be money because it doesn't fulfill all the particulars as Mises laid out, and not in his 1912 book, but in his rearticulation of the issue in 1949 with Human Action. Therefore, Bitcoin can't be real. Okay. That's one perspective. Another perspective that I've bumped into is just the general anti-computer bias. So there's people out there who just think that everything on the internet is worthless. There's a guy on the fee thread who said, look, Bitcoin's no different from Facebook. It's just another worthless, overvalued thing. Well, okay, Facebook is worth what, $115 billion at this point? You know, I mean, how valuable does Facebook have to get before people began to realize, okay, this is actually a valuable thing. This is not a myth. And then you've got other people, and I'm dealing with those people on Twitter right now, who are saying, give it up, Mises was wrong, Bitcoin is right, there's no reason to have to keep dusting off this old book and going through all these intellectual contortions to try to make it work. So you have commentators on all sides. I mean, what I'm saying in particular is that there is no real wedge between Mises' old writings and Satoshi's invention. I think if you have the right understanding of both, then you can see how they can come together and make a perfect and beautiful unity. Again, with a slight tweak here and there, but which are not substantial to the theory. The fact is that the blockchain has the use value that Mises said a pre-money has to have, and Bitcoin absorbed that use value to obtain a market price as a tool for indirect exchange, which is to say, a money. And in that sense, Bitcoin emerges exactly according to Menger and Mises' theory, from the ground up, emerging out of organic trade in the real world, not a top-down system requiring a social contract, but through entrepreneurship and play and trial and error out of the real experience of market actors. And I think that this is tremendously exciting and should reveal to us the potential of markets to reinvent the world in ways that absolutely surprise us. In the end, state services, from its monetary services to its educational services and transportation and fiscal policy and every other area, foreign policy, drug wars, these things are tremendous failures. The great calling of our times today is for private actors in the private space where there's real innovation to use the new tools we have, among which are distributed networks, to create better versions of all the things the state has attempted to monopolize, and thereby build out a new freedom that comes from creativity, innovation, and market action that will eventually outcompete and obsolete the state. And that's the hope and the promise of Bitcoin in particular. So Matt, and let's say somebody else. Matt, you want to jump in here? And you're a Bitcoin expert. You want to help me out here?
Sure, why not? I think one of the points I like to make is that Bitcoin can teach us something about how we do theory as Austrians. It's kind of revealed something because it's different than the things we've looked at in the past. It's revealed some mistakes in a lot of scholars' thinking about how we approach theory, because Just take a look at this regression theorem debacle. People are saying, oh, it doesn't meet the requirements of the regression theorem, therefore it can't be money. Well, first of all, it's the claim they need to be making if they're trying to go that direction is that it can't be a medium of exchange. And I think there are a couple of them that go so far. However, when you say, Bitcoin isn't a medium of exchange, I mean, that's obviously false. Look at how it's being used. It's being used as a medium of exchange. Whether it fits into the little box that you've created around the regression theorem or not, it is a medium of exchange. Now, theory is created to describe our reality. It's not created to describe itself because we have this a priori theory. If it is to tell us anything about reality, if it is synthetic a priori as opposed to just analytic a priori, if it's more than just a truism, it has to describe reality and not something that's defined by itself. So the regression theorem is supposed to describe what a medium of exchange acts like. Now, we can't define medium of exchange by the theory, or else we're not really saying anything about reality. We're just, talking to ourselves. We're talking in circles. It's a truism. If we're going to describe what a medium of exchange is, then we have to take what we see as a medium of exchange. So that's something that's being used as literally a medium for for indirect exchange. So if, as Mises thought, the regression theorem is a priori truth, if it's apodictic, then we don't have to fit Bitcoin into any boxes. Bitcoin we can automatically know that it satisfies the regression theorem because Bitcoin is a medium of exchange. If the regression theorem is true and apodictic, then Bitcoin satisfies the regression theorem. We can know that a priori without even knowing the history. So the discussion of, what was actually the use value? What did people value it for? That's a discussion of, what's the history there? It's not something that we have to look at to say, does it meet these requirements? Otherwise, we can't say it's a medium of exchange. And so I think a lot of people, and unfortunately I've seen at least one really major Austrian theorist quoted as falling into this trap of basically doing theory backwards, working from theory to build reality rather than from reality to build theory. Now, I'm hoping that misconception was caused by the fact, this is a new thing. Austrian scholars, like most professors, they're busy people. They have very little time to spend on new fads, which is unfortunate, but that's kind of the way the system is right now. But so they haven't looked at these issues quite as closely, or hadn't at least a year and a half ago. I presented a paper at the Austrian Economics Research Conference in March on this topic, kind of elucidating some of these issues around Bitcoin, and kind of pointed out, we have to take a look at how we're doing theory, and we can look at these new examples of things that are described by our theory as a way of not only telling us something about what reality is, of saying, what is Bitcoin, but saying, okay, do we have the theory correct? Can we refine it at all? And I think that we can, using...
You're right. I mean, one of the big issues here is that we've got technology that's not a priori understandable. I mean, the unity of the blockchain and the accounting unit is a very difficult thing to understand. Distributed networks are difficult to understand. Cryptography and its capability of establishing, a trustless, timestamp verifiable information transfers, that's difficult to understand. It requires real study. You can't just be in an armchair and pronounce. I mean, I think this is one of the sources of confusion. People look at Bitcoin as if it were just a money, and they go, oh, well, it's not a commodity, it's not hard, I can't eat it, I can't use it on my food, I can't use it for industrial purposes, I can't wear it around my neck. So therefore, it can't be a money because money has to begin in a commodity. But they're looking at Bitcoin as if it were a normal money, like we've always had in all of human history, but that's not true. It's a special kind of money that's attached to a trustless payment network itself. But those are technicalities that require that you have some patience, that you have a teachable spirit, that you actually read and look things up, that sort of thing. And it's not just, all truth is not revealed out of the logic of your mind without any empirical facts, deigning to cloud, your vision. So that's been, I think, a real problem for Bitcoin among Austrians. It's a weird sense because like when you read Satoshi's white paper, he doesn't puzzle about any of this stuff at all. It's not even anything that these problems haven't even occurred to him, right? He's just he's just trying to invent a wonderfully beautiful mathematical code-based solution to a different kind of problem. It's only the Austrians that get sort of tangled up because of, what I've called in the past pop versions of the regression theorem. Which that pop version is that, something's got to be a physical commodity before it can ever become money. So therefore, Bitcoin can't become money. And that's not what Mises said, and that just dramatically limits the range of possibilities in the field of monetary innovation. And I think these times especially call for us to broaden out our horizons and be especially creative and understanding what markets can do. Markets that can outsmart even the best intellectuals, and I think in a way Bitcoin is an example of that.
I think another trap that people are kind of falling into here that's kind of confusing them is they're reading the theory next to the historical descriptions used by Rothbard and Mises. So Mises and Rothbard will set out this beautiful, clean theory, and then they'll give examples. They'll say, it's usually gold or silver, or, money is nothing but a commodity. It's not a claim on goods, and that's very true. But the examples they use are very concrete, things that have been seen historically with monies in the past. And so people read that and they don't separate the theory from the historical explanation, and so they see that Bitcoin doesn't look like the historical explanation, and then think that it can't meet the theory. And I think that's completely wrong. Satoshi actually did address the regression theorem on the Bitcoin Talk forums.
Really?
In early 2010, they brought up the regression theorem and said, how does Bitcoin fit with this? And he said, as a thought experiment, imagine there was a base metal as scarce as gold, but with the following properties. It's boring gray in color, not a good conductor of electricity, not particularly strong, but not ductile or easily malleable either, and not useful for any practical or ornamental purpose. But then it has one special magical property. It can be transported over a communications channel. Now, if it somehow acquired any value at all for whatever reason, then anyone wanting to transfer wealth over a long distance could buy some, transmit it, and have the recipient sell it. So maybe it could get an initial value circularly, as suggested by some, by people foreseeing its potential usefulness for exchange. And he says here in parentheses, I would definitely want some. Maybe collectors, any random reason could spark it. I think the traditional qualifications for money were written with the assumption that there are so many competing objects in the world that are scarce. An object with the automatic bootstrap of intrinsic value will surely win out over those without intrinsic value. And here you can see he's probably meaning use value, which is what a lot of the intrinsic value critics really mean when they say it.
Right.
But he continues, but if there were nothing in the world with intrinsic value that could be used as money, only scarce but with no intrinsic value, I think people would still take up something. And he says, I'm using the word scarce here to only mean limited potential supply. So he obviously had a very firm grasp of kind of this economic way of thinking. Whether or not he had kind of thought particularly from an Austrian direction before he was creating Bitcoin itself, when he was writing the white paper, he obviously had been kind of thinking about these issues. He designed something that looked like gold. I mean, if you had told me years ago that there would be this magic internet money that would be created that would act like gold, I would have been like, man, libertarians are going to be all over that. But then a lot of people are, I don't know if it's, they think it's too good to be true, or they just get caught up in some of these misconceptions. It's really unfortunate. This is something that libertarians should be embracing. And
Well, I have to tell you, madam, in my own case, I began to get articles submitted to me as early as maybe 2010 about the subject. And at that time, I did not know enough about open source um, protocols, about distributed networks, about cryptography, to make any sense out of what I was reading, you know. So I basically dismissed it maybe for as long as 3 years or 2 years, maybe 2.5 years, just because I didn't have the intellectual acumen to follow the arguments. So I think that's a big source of the problem. At some point, I sat down and actually learned about all this stuff, and then it became really clear to me. And now I use now I try not to talk in geek language when I talk about this stuff. But it's very difficult because these are new ideas and new terms, and sometimes people find them off-putting and confusing.
yeah, I mean, I first heard about Bitcoin in 2011 because I'm friends with a lot of libertarians, obviously, and they were really excited about this thing. They were all kind of tech-minded people. And so in like early 2012, I finally sat down to learn a little bit about it because they were hyping it up just incredibly. And I'm always skeptical of anything that gets a lot of hype. And they were telling me, this is the money of the future. This is going to reduce government. It's going to eliminate corporate spying on transactions. It's going to get the government out of your markets. It's digital gold. And so all of these things kind of set off a blinking red light in my mind. There's something wrong. I need to look into this. And
Right.
so my skepticism is why I'm not rich like some of my friends. Because I took, at the time, I think I was a TA for Robert Murphy's class on theory of money and credit. So I decided I was going to dive into this. I was going to learn all about it. And then by the time I was really comfortable with saying, Bitcoin is a good Austrian money, it was over $100.
Yeah, that's funny.
So
I jumped into it at about 14. But you know what's interesting about this too is that we're now at this stage very advanced actually compared to what we were a year ago. We now have extra layers of colored coins. We have these proprietarily controlled blockchains that are building off the public ledger. We've got altcoins. That use different standards of, besides proof of work, there's proof of stake. I've got tens of thousands of altcoins. So we have a lot of experimentation going on. B2Bs, looking at it for all sorts of purposes. People talking about using the blockchain for issues of smart contracting, futures, stock sales, so on and so on. I mean, history is moving forward. I have a friend of mine, it's actually Michael, I'm sure he wouldn't mind my saying this, but when I wrote this article for Fee.org that came out yesterday, he wrote me and chastised me. He said, what are you trying to do, revert history to 2012? We're past this point. We don't need to be playing in this particular sandbox anymore. And I think he's got a point. History is moving on.
I love Michael. He and I were at Mises U 2013 together, and the talk of that event was Bitcoin,
Sure.
largely because of me and Michael, and I think Michael had some Bitcoin that you had given him to
Thanks
give
very
out to
much. He
people.
came and begged me for a Bitcoin. I gave him a whole Bitcoin. He passed it out to everybody, and it was funny because I think there was a confusion. I expected to be paid back for that, and he gave it all away. But I mean, I think Bitcoin at that point was what, you know, $80. Okay, so
I think it was 105 that week. It was
okay.
I had just recently decided that I was comfortable. I had had Bitcoin before that. At one point, I had 4.2 Bitcoin, and I was dumb enough not to back it up, and I dropped the laptop it was on, and the hard drive died.
See, this is why we got to get out of Bitcoin. Your money can't be that vulnerable. You can't just drop a laptop and cause all your wealth to go vanish.
Oh, that was when the price hit 12.50. I nearly cried.
Yeah, I know. Right now, the Bitcoin subreddit is all filled with stories about Bitcoin and suicide as the relationship between the two. It's pretty funny, but it's not funny. It's actually very serious. But yeah, this is a startup culture, and in the 1880s, you could have read a story about railroads and suicide too. This.
And I mean, yeah, early 2000s, it was .com companies and suicide.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, thank you, Matt, for hanging out with me today. I'm glad you showed up, and I think it's good that we hold this thing. So let's just keep an eye on it, and I'll try to not keep slogging around in this messy sandbox, and let's just look to the future.
Absolutely.
Take care, my
Good to hang
friend.
out with you.
Bye
See
bye.
ya.
Bye bye, and thanks everyone.